see that there's a larger crowd here than there was previously, and I hope we don't continue to have these meetings until they reach a cast of thousands. But we appreciate everybody being here today. I want to start on a somewhat more somber note than anything having to do with our budget. Some of you may have heard we had an unfortunate tragedy on campus last night. We had a young man who was killed, and I think our hearts go out to the family and friends. The main thing I want to stress is that the police are investigating, and there's no reason to believe that foul play was involved. There's no threat to any of you or any other students, but a young KU student has lost their life. Unfortunately, it does give today's subject a little certain amount of perspective. Let me share a couple things. I think most of you saw that we sent out a memo from me saying new revenue figures change budget picture. And we'll be explaining to you today how that budget picture has changed. It was only a week ago that Governor Sebelius signed the fiscal year 2010 budget bill. And that bill cut KU's budget by just over 7% for the upcoming year, not counting unfunded mandates that push that figure to more than 8%. But we don't spend percentages, we spend dollars. And under this budget, KU and the KU Medical Center will have $23 million less to spend in fiscal year 2010 than was originally appropriated in fiscal year 2009. So you know that as a context to start out with, the difference between fiscal year 2010 and 2009. As I said when that budget was enacted, it is a cut, and yet it's within the planning that we've been doing all along this fall and winter. If our budget remains at this level, it puts certain investments on hold, but it is also probably something that would enable us to carry out our academic and research missions. So that's why we were calling a third forum on the state budget crisis and its effect on KU. Now I want to thank the Faculty Senate, particularly the University Support Senate, the University Support Staff Senate, the Unclassified Senate, and the Faculty Senate for co-sponsoring today's event, as well as all of you for taking the time out of your day to attend. Just a couple mechanical things, housekeeping things here. I want to thank those of you who are watching online from Kansas City, Wichita, Overland Park, and elsewhere. If those of you watching online have questions, you can email them to chancellor@ku.edu. And we'll get back, we'll either deal with the question here today or we'll get back to you by email. As I said earlier, this is the third budget forum that we've had this year. Our goal is to keep you informed about the state's budget situation, how it impacts KU, and how we're responding. And I think you know the people who are with me, but I will introduce them. To my left is Provost Richard Lariviere, who's been leading much of the planning, budget planning that we've done. Sitting to my far right is Kathy Damron, who's Director of State Relations at KU. And to my immediate right is Theresa Gordzica, Chief Financial Officer. I think I'm not sure how we decided we were going to start, but I'll let Richard go ahead, and then we'll move to Kathy and to Theresa, or however Kathy and Theresa want us want to revise.
Actually,
Richard?
Theresa, why don't you give us an overview of the situation as we see it?
I've got the fiscal year 09 and the fiscal year 10 as the bill has been passed so far. For fiscal year 09, we had a 4.25% reduction in our state general fund appropriation. That was about $6.5 million at the Lawrence campus and about $5.2 million at the medical center. We've taken care of those reductions usually using primarily one-time funds, holding positions vacant, delaying hiring, delaying equipment, technology purchases, deferral of major capital purchases, and some departmental OOE. In addition, there was to the 4.25%, there were some scholarship funds, namely the medical loan program at the medical center that took a 1.25% reduction. That bill also includes $9.6 million in stimulus funds that the regents have directed be used for deferred maintenance. That's $2 million for the Lawrence campus and about $868,000 for the medical center. And the regents will be looking at our list of projects at their next meeting in May. We mentioned before the group health insurance and death and disability moratorium. Those were implemented in 2009 rather than 2010 as the governor had proposed. For 2010, the bill that's been passed that the governor signed last week, as the chancellor mentioned, had just over a 7% reduction for the universities, about $11 million at Lawrence and $8.8 million at the medical center. The bill also included a 1% salary increase for classified staff that was mandatory for classified staff. It continued the under-market adjustment plan, has been referred to as the Hay study for classified staff. And then it swept money that universities had budgeted for longevity pay, but required the universities to still make that longevity payment, again, for classified staff. The bill also included $40 million in stimulus funds that the legislature directed be restricted to deferred maintenance. However, when the governor signed the bill, she vetoed that provision, so there currently is no restriction on the use of those stimulus funds. The regents will propose how those funds are to be used by the universities. I might back up a minute and talk about the mandates. As the chancellor mentioned, salary increases along with the increased cost of employers' share of health insurance, utilities, other increases brings our known costs and cuts up to over 8%, which is the $23 million that we really either have less money or know we have known increases for the coming year. The budget reductions, 7.1%, we had sent targets out to both campuses to plan for those reductions, and both campuses, I think, have responded. We've got about 100 positions at the Lawrence campus that have been eliminated. 10 of those were filled. At the medical center, they've eliminated 79 positions, 46 of those which were filled. And then they've got a number of reduced appointments as well. And I just want to end on a high note. The School of Pharmacy project, the legislature recommended and the governor approved an additional $30 million in bonding authority for that project. So that project is now fully funded, and the state will be picking up the debt service on that project. And Kathy, you want to talk about what's happened this week?
Right, where she gets to leave on a high note, I'll bring it back down to reality. So thanks for that, Theresa, very much. Before I get into that, I did want to recognize Senator Marcy Francisco, who is here with us. Marcy, if you wouldn't mind standing up and greeting everyone. Marcy does a great job representing the university and the community, and certainly all of the people who work here on a daily basis at the State House. She is a strong advocate for education. She works very effectively across party lines, so we're really grateful to have her strong leadership in the legislature, and have really been fortunate, especially this year when the pressures have been pretty steep, to look for every available dollar to put into the shortfall that Marcy's been an advocate to keep keep the wolves at bay to the degree that that's been possible. What's happened this week is the budget makers have come back to town. The rest of the legislature is still on break, but they are crafting what's called the omnibus or the wrap-up budget package. And they do this every year once they know more about what the ending balances are likely to look like under revised estimates after tax filing day, April 15th. And this year, unfortunately, we had record-setting downturns in those economic forecasts. In fact, it was really unparalleled. For this current fiscal year that we're in right now, which ends the end of June, the receipts were downgraded by an additional $115 million. So that was just about what the level of ending balances were in the budget that they had adopted back in February. So that took all of the extra money that was in the bank. And then for the budget, which will begin in July, they downgraded the expected receipts for fiscal year FY10 by $400 million. So lawmakers this week who serve on the Senate Ways and Means Committee or the House Appropriations Committee have been working to try to find ways to make up that shortfall, and doing so under great pressure, of course, not to try to balance the budget on the backs of any one group or any one area. And they've tried, actually, even though, especially in the House committee, there's an awful lot of what I would consider to be very fiscally conservative members. They really did try to reach a balance between making up the shortfall in new revenues, i.e. taxes, and spending reductions. So both chambers, both the House and the Senate committee, did their work this week. Interestingly, they ended up with spending cuts that were about of the same magnitude, although they took them from different places, and they both ended up looking for about $100 million in new taxes through a variety of different areas. One is to temporarily decouple from the federal stimulus tax cuts that were enacted, and the other is just to delay for 2 years at this point anyway, some scheduled tax reliefs that were on the books to take effect. So that would, if the legislature, when they come back to town next week, goes along with both of those proposals, that would bring a little over $100 million new revenue into the state is what's anticipated. That still left a little over $200 million to make up the difference. So where they went is pretty interesting. They were limited in how much they could actually take from both K-12 public education budgets and higher education, because Kansas is one of the fortunate states that has a governor and a legislature that are in agreement that we want to use every single dollar of economic stimulus that we can possibly qualify for and get into the state to get working on behalf of our citizens. So the Senate took 2.5% of additional cuts from every state agency, whether it was social services, education, healthcare, public safety. They also then went into a number of areas that were sort of one-time only, yet to be realized budget savings. And through those combined strategies came up with around $230 million in additional cuts. The House went a different direction. They looked at different priorities, and they felt that corrections had actually taken, and public safety agencies had taken probably a disproportionate share of the cuts in the earlier budgeting. And so they ended up taking just a little smaller hit. As a result of that, every other state agency took on a larger burden. So unfortunately, social services and some of those agencies that provide the social service safety net for people are being asked to take another 5% cut, which is an awfully hard thing to imagine that they're going to be able to do. And for K-12 and for higher education under the House budget, it's just right under 4% of additional cuts. So translation of all of that into dollars for higher education would be the Senate plan would reduce spending for all higher education system-wide by about $20 million, and the House plan would reduce it by about $29 million. I would look for them, obviously, to meet somewhere in the middle, and then shore up the difference, hopefully, with the package of tax breaks being put on hold for a while until we get through the economic downturn. So the legislature will be back in session to take these matters up on Wednesday the 29th. I would anticipate them being in session for about 10 days. So Marcy, is there anything you would like to add to that at this point?
No, from what I've heard from others and read, that really states well the position that we're in.
I would just tell you that we have had a really aggressive advocacy effort, and I'm very appreciative to the faculty and the students that have been thoughtful and very participatory in that. What you probably haven't seen much of is the partnership we have with our alumni across the state, and they have been terrific when we have asked them to let lawmakers know from their hometowns. You know, in every county in the state's 105 counties, we have alumni who are active politically and know their state lawmakers. And so they've been a very productive, strong voice on our behalf. And it's been, I think, especially effective when we were looking at some pretty draconian cuts in the Senate. It was, you know, one measure is we activated people to send emails, and sort of by noon that day I had members of the Senate stopping me and saying, we probably have cut higher education too much, haven't we? I said, great. So.
The one thing I thought about was the veto of the sales tax.
Mhm.
So that's also in this picture and hopefully might not be overturned.
I don't think that it will be overturned, Marcy. Thank you for mentioning that. There was another bill that had been sent to the governor, which had a $40 million fiscal note that included some sales tax rebates for the sales of new automobiles and a couple of other tax provisions that made its way to the governor's desk. And she took care of that either last night or this morning, along with some other bills that were vetoed. So we have had a pretty grim session, actually, in terms of the budget, and people are making awfully hard decisions. But the resources, you know, have not been brought into the state as is the case in every other state. I would just tell you that people have tried to put as much money into education as they possibly can. So, Richard?
Well, thank you, Kathy. That was a really good summary of an incredibly complicated and very fluid situation. And if you're sitting there thinking, gosh, that summary didn't leave me with a very clear understanding of the situation, then it was probably a pretty good summary. One of the things that I think is important for us all to remember here is that unlike normal times when we may be in debates in a legislative session over whether we should invest our money in roads or we should invest our money in social services or health care or education, et cetera. This is a situation in which these legislators are valiantly dealing with an unprecedented situation. This isn't a case of these cuts that we're talking about being visited on us because they don't like higher education and they'd rather do something else. They are really doing their very best to protect these institutions, and the consequences of this are pretty dire. The odd thing about this is that we are in a situation where when we hear that there's going to be a 7% cut, we think about it in terms of only a 7% cut, or only a 10% cut, or only a whatever percent cut. We've never seen cuts of that magnitude at this institution in one fell swoop like this. As dire as this situation is, there really is something quite remarkable that's going on here, and that is that it's bringing out the best in everybody. I continue to be amazed at how effectively the deans and heads of FO, DCM, other units are engaging this problem. An unprecedented amount of cuts that will have very serious consequences for, first of all, for for our colleagues, for us as human beings, as individuals, but also institutionally on our ability to fulfill our mission. And yet, every time I've had a conversation with the people responsible for making these hard decisions, they're ready to do it, and doing it in what looks to me a very consultative, rational, reasoned manner that's very transparent. I wish I could tell you today, right now, that so as a result of this, here is what we're going to do and how we're going to achieve it. We can't do that right now simply because of what Kathy just described. We don't know what we have to do yet. I can tell you, however, that the very bottom of our list is furloughs and further job cuts. We will do whatever we can to protect the people who are working here. Now, by protect, I mean also protect benefits, et cetera. We simply don't know what's going to come down the pike. I would love to tell you that there will be no furloughs. I can't tell you that at this point because we don't know what the consequences of the deliberation of the legislature are going to be. I will tell you that furloughs are our second to last option. Our last option is significant further layoffs. We're pretty thinly staffed right now, and we're going to be even more thinly staffed next year. The real consequences of this matter haven't visited us yet. It's next year that it's going to really come to roost on us. We're all going to have more work to do because we are not going to be able to fill jobs, and we all still have to fulfill that sacred central mission of this institution, which is the teaching and research that we exist for. So with that, I want to simply express my gratitude to all of you for your patience and your forbearance and your understanding in this circumstance, recognizing full well that in some cases the fear of what may happen is actually worse than what may happen. So we are really in the darkest period in some ways right now, institutionally. And the response of this institution is something to be intensely proud of. I think the best use of our time at this point is probably just to answer any questions that you may have. Could you use the mic so the folks listening in can?
To what extent are the community colleges going to be affected by these budget cuts?
Well, Jeanette, they're affected proportionately the same as any funded state agency are. So to the degree that they receive state funding, their budgets are cut, that state portion that they receive, by the same percentage because it goes through the Board of Regents that we would be cut percentage-wise. And I would also say that they also are, they're going to be affected by another part of the budget, I believe, which is the property tax slider payment, which would go back to the counties to make up for the lost property tax revenue when we took business machinery and equipment off the tax rolls. We're not going to make those slider payments. The state doesn't have the money now in fiscal year 09 to make that payment. So that's another tax shift. That money's not going to go to the counties. They're not going to have the property tax base. You can see how this will play out. So, they have sort of a different pressure there, too.
Provost,
Yes, Provost, I'd like to hear, you said that layoffs, furloughs were at the bottom of your list. Can you share with us anything that's in the middle or the top of the list?
Well, we've been using the usual techniques of not filling vacancies as they come open. It's very, very hard to imagine that we are going to have any kind of significant salary increases this year. We obviously have to respond on very narrowly focused individual cases, outside offers of individuals that we simply can't afford to lose. There will be money for promotion and tenure increases this year. but I've probably said no more times in the last 6 months than I have in the rest of my career combined. It's really been a very painful time. And so the usual sorts of things. No matter what operation you're associated with, you're going to have less operating funds than you did last year, and next year will be even worse. We are pinching all of those to the extent that we possibly can, keeping in mind that we have to have writing utensils and we have to have the lights on, etc. But we're really squeezing everything that we possibly can, even to the point where I notice that, for example, lights are switched off in the buildings that I go through much more frequently than they were before. I think this has just permeated people's consciousness that every nickel is going to make a difference cumulatively. And the pattern that we have followed is to give those people with the responsibility for delivering services, deans and managers, etc. They are the ones we think, and I'm absolutely convinced of this, who know better how to make cuts in their respective areas than anywhere else. And so what we have done is, rather than go in and say, cut this, cut this, cut this, we have given numbers to these people and say, we need you to reduce your budget by this amount. And judging from the feedback that I've had so far, I think there's been a pretty judicious use of that responsibility and authority. Yes, ma'am.
I have a couple of quick questions as far as the numbers, I guess. When you're talking about a 7 or 8% cut for next fiscal year, I assume that's in state dollars, because we're not a wholly
That's right.
all of our money doesn't come from the state, it comes from other areas. What percentage of the total budget is being cut? That 7%, I assume, is a 7% from the state, of the state's portion. So do we know what portion of the total budget will be cut for FY10?
That's
Yeah.
a really hard. It's a really
Good,
interesting
yeah.
question. I haven't ever thought of it in
Oh.
quite those terms, but it's a really hard one because the aggregate number that we talk about is the university's overall operating budget, which is
About
$1 billion roughly, includes lots and lots of basically pass-through money over which we have no control at all. So grant money can only be used for specific grants,
Right,
et cetera,
yes.
et cetera.
Yeah, yeah.
And so what for most of us, what we're really focused on is that money over which we have some control. That is, can we use it for this rather than that? Can we hire somebody instead of building something, et cetera?
All right, well, since I thought that was an easy question, I have another,
Yeah.
a couple more, and I thought that I hope the next one will be an easier one. And then I have a more complex one, so we'll see. The second one is, what portion of the university budget is funded from the endowment, from private sources?
What portion of the budget is funded from the endowment
endowment,
versus private sources?
Well,
Because they're not the same.
Right, yeah, from private donations, not counting grants. So does
Yeah,
that
I don't-
make the distinction, or?
I don't have that number on the top of my head, but I know on the Comptroller's Office website, the financial report is out there, and that
And that
information
would be
is in
there,
it.
so I
Yeah.
could go there and get that,
Right.
okay. And the reason I bring this up is because I want to talk about the 800-pound gorilla in the room. And to me, the 800-pound gorilla is the Athletic Corporation. And it's my understanding that the Athletic Corporation is allowed to go to potential donors first, doesn't need permission from anybody, could approach anyone they want to as a potential donor, and the money then goes to the Athletic Corporation. At a time when the University of Kansas is so strapped for funds, it seems to me that more of that private funding, the endowment funding, those donations, could be coming to the university and solve some of our problems. rather than giving bonuses and new buildings and new facilities to what seems to me to be an already bloated athletic corporation. I know that's a judgmental comment, but I think it's one that I've heard from a number of faculty and staff. It seems to me that the athletic corporation is being held harmless in this, and that everyone else is suffering. Either they're a part of the university or they're not. If they're a part of the university, then they should be suffering as well. If they're not a part of the university, then I think we need to take some hard looks at whether or not, for example, they can use the name University of Kansas Athletic Corporation. So if I would appreciate comments from any or all of you on that.
Well, we could probably have a long discussion that would extend through the whole afternoon, and which we would find that we have a variety of opinions about athletics. I don't think that it's correct to say that the athletic department goes and seeks money from whoever it wants to. My understanding is that the athletic department and the endowment association discuss those kinds of things and lay out decisions that are made and when to pursue a particular donor. I don't believe it's correct to say that the athletic department doesn't have to pay any attention to who might want to give money to the university. Either and what frequently happens is that you find individuals who want to give money to athletics, but who also want to give money to the university. That's just, I just think that's a matter of fact. If you know that I'm wrong about that, then please let me know, because that's not what I've been led to believe. But the bottom line, I think, is the athletic department is not going to be able to solve all of the problems of the university. As a matter of fact, the athletic department last year donated $750,000 to academic scholarship programs and $250,000 to the cancer initiative at the medical center. So it's not accurate to say that the athletic department is not participating in some of the same budget considerations that we've faced elsewhere.
I'm grateful to you for raising that, because you're right, it is the 800-pound gorilla. It's probably about a 450-pound gorilla. There are other issues that are eating at people too, but we have to remember what these phenomena are. How many of you were really angry when the NCAA championship was won by the University of Kansas last year? None of us. This is entertainment. That's what this is. And it's different from the university. Now, you and I may shake our heads in wonder at why someone would want to pay $10,000 for a seat at a sporting event. I would never pay $10,000 to go to a sporting event. There are thousands of people who are happy to do that. This is not something that the university can just dictate. One of the flaws in the understanding of how universities and athletics programs work is that there's this notion that there's this universe of donors out there who are just simple rich people with big bags of money that they're going to give to the first person who asks for it. And so when I go to them and say, we really need to endow a chair of Sanskrit, they say, oh, great, here's $2 million. And I just barely beat Lou Perkins, who was going to come in and say, you know, we need to remodel the such and such facility, and it's going to cost $2 million. And pardon?
I believe you're making light
No. I don't mean to be making light of your comment. I'm asking that we recognize the distinction between entertainment and education. And they're in the entertainment business, pure and simple. The fact that people are willing to pay a great deal more for entertainment than they are for education is lamentable. It's wrong, in my view. It reflects a peculiar set of values, but that's the society that we live in. There are a lot of people who give money to both the university and to athletics, but ultimately it's their decision what they do with their money. And I'm pretty sure that if those donors come to the Chancellor and say, what are your priorities, athletics or the educational mission, the core mission of this institution? There's no question what the Chancellor would respond, what most of us would respond. This is a very, very complex subject, and one of the things that we have to recognize is that we are the beneficiaries of a successful athletics program, because the mind share that these athletics programs buy nationally is really significant. Now, you may not think so, but I can tell you that going around the country, the estimation of the University of Kansas is different after having won a national championship. Now, is that worth selling your soul for? Absolutely not. One of the things that I think we can hold our heads up high here at the University of Kansas is that we don't use money that could be used for the educational mission to subsidize athletics. Now, that may seem like a simple and obvious position for a university to take, but there are not very many big league athletics programs that can make that claim in the United States. There are really only a handful, and this is one of them. They are engaged, the athletics program is engaged in a struggle, their own set of struggles to be competitive, to hire the best people, et cetera, et cetera. It grates on me that we as a society are willing to spend those kinds of monies on entertainment when the children in this state aren't getting social services or the educational opportunities that they need in order to be fully fulfilled individuals. But that's who we are, unfortunately.
Is there any information you have on the status of federal stimulus dollars that are supposed to be going to higher education?
Go ahead, Theresa.
Kathy, do you?
You want to talk about?
Well, I can tell you that the way it's worked in Kansas is the federal stimulus dollars that are part of the package with K-12 is we've made full use of them, those that are given to the Board of Regents through the governor's office. Now, there are other pockets that go into different federal agencies that the university is applying for through, competitive grant processes and a number of other processes through individual schools and disciplines that I've been very impressed with the robust engine in this university that is going after them in almost every area and discipline. A great deal of work had been done in planning on a number of fronts, just serendipitous that the stimulus package came along and allowed for there to be new pockets of money for researchers to go after. But for Kansas in higher education, we received an additional $10 million in fiscal year 2009, $40 million for fiscal year 10, and another $40 million for the fiscal year thereafter.
And the 10 million for the 9 is limited to deferred maintenance projects. They have not given us the parameters on the 40 million for fiscal year 10 or 11 yet.
The other thing I would say in terms of, the great unknowns and where we will be budgetarily is the Board of Regents has not yet made its decisions as it relates to what kind of tuition increase, if any, will be given to this university or any of the other universities. And they are waiting until the legislature finishes its budget deliberations in May, and then they will take those actions at its May meeting. So that's another great unknown facing the university in terms of its budget and the students and families in Kansas. Knowing what kind of tuition they'll be asked to be paying.
Might add to that too, Dan. Monday and Tuesday I was in Washington because I'm the vice chair of the American Association of Universities, and we were being briefed by members of the Obama administration, particularly on the issue of stimulus dollars. There's no question that stimulus dollars are going to be available in Kansas. To what degree, we don't know. You have to make proposals, but I do know that the robust engine that Kathy was referring to is the engine that's created by faculty and staff who seek funding from the federal government and who are going to have the opportunity to do that in considerable measure, I think, based upon what we were hearing on Monday and Tuesday.
Let me ask you a question, and if you might be able to answer about revenue generation. What's the most significant immediate potential you see for revenue streams coming into the university in the next 1 to 3 years, let's say, other than the research triangle at Edwards?
Well, we're hoping that we significantly increase the revenues that we have coming in for research. There's a lot of the way the stimulus is rolling out in Washington is that these monies are being distributed in a variety of areas. There isn't just one bag and you apply for one agency. NSF, NIH, NEH, and NEA, all of those grant agencies have had their budgets increased. So far, NIH is way ahead of everyone else in terms of the implementation of new policies. So we'll see some increased monies on the research side. It's simply the fact that in the United States, in the arena of public higher education, that states have been walking away very slowly and very steadily from their obligation to pay for higher education. Now, we can talk about why that is, whether it's good, whether it's fair, et cetera, but no one denies that, for example, the University of Kansas used to get 45% of its budget from the state, and we now get 23%, and we'll get a dramatically lower percentage next year. We are the ones who have elected the people who have made these decisions, so let's not get into who's responsible for that at this point. But the fact is that that's the case. In order to preserve these places, we have to do two things. We have to become more efficient at every turn, and we have, and this place in particular, but we're still not as efficient as we need to be, or as we will be forced to be. And secondly, we've had to increase tuition and fees, and assess fees for things that we haven't assessed fees for before. Tuition has increased, as everyone knows, much more rapidly than inflation for the past 30 years. This institution has had an average tuition increase over the last 30 years, every single year, average increase of over 9%. Now that sounds astonishing to everybody who hears that fact, and it still astonishes me even after I've discovered it 3 years ago, but it is the case. And it's very hard to see how this rapid stepping away from that responsibility isn't going to result in higher costs to the students, but we'll see. Student Senate passed a resolution in which they kept their fees to zero this year, the increased fees to zero this year, with the explicit request that whatever elasticity those increases might have absorbed should be invested in tuition, because they recognize that tuition is the most effective and distributed benefit to students that we have of all of our revenue streams. I'm not saying that therefore we're going to have an increase in tuition next year. That's the Regent's decision, and they've had lots of conversations about it, but those conversations are fixing to get pretty hard. Yes, Mary.
Is this on? My name is Mary Berry. In some instances, I'm a representative of some constituencies here on campus, on the Lawrence campus, and I want to make clear that my comments are as an individual faculty member in the School of Social Welfare. I want to extend my appreciation for these fora that have been held over the past month or so as the budget situation continues to change, and your willingness to come to the table and talk to the community when you don't have all the answers, but at least you can tell us what you know at the moment. I think that's been very helpful. There is a lot of fear, and I think this is helpful to that. Clearly, money is the point of the meeting. The budget is the point of the meeting, and I do think that athletics is part of the money in this university. So I appreciate the question that was raised earlier about athletics, and I appreciate your response, Provost, that it is a very complicated situation, one of which I'm glad I don't know all the details. And I appreciate that, and I very much recognize the fact that it's that's the entertainment side. There's an athletics corporation that's on the entertainment side of the university, that there are folks willing to pay lots of money for seats and so on and so forth. The entertainers are members of the educational side of the university. They're not members of the athletic corporation, unless there's some contract signed of which I'm unaware.
There better not be, or we're in trouble with the NCAA.
Exactly. So I would hope, and as you say, the monetary situation for the university is dire, and is more dire than any of us have ever seen. And so I guess more than I guess my question is, or my comment is, I hope that the university, in facing the challenges to come, would entertain the possibility of looking at more blend between the two sides of this university, given the bridge between the corporation and where those entertainers are coming from, and that when those students, those athletes, bring home a national championship, when they increase the notoriety, the image of the university, that they're doing so as members of the university community.
Well, thank you for that, Mary. This is a very sticky part of the whole confusing, complicated equation, and you've really put your finger on something that is particularly troubling. When you have this enormous entertainment edifice that is built on the notion that we have scholar athletes who are doing this for free, just because they love it. They're getting out of bed every morning at 5:30 and running 10 miles or whatever it is that they do to prepare for this. They're basically putting in 40 to 50-hour weeks as athletes, and I'm not talking just about the big revenue sports. I'm talking now about the women rowers and the people who throw hammers and javelins, etc. They are investing the equivalent of a full working life every single day in that sport. And then on top of that, we ask them to be students, and the NCAA aggressively insists that we do nothing different for those students than we do for any other student, and that's just fine. Another thing that we can be intensely proud of at this institution is that the grade point average of all of our student athletes last semester was 2.99. I mean, this is really remarkable. The graduation rates for many of our sports are really admirable. And yet we are working in an environment in which there's such a wacky situation that if I have a group of students over to my house and give them all a hot dog and a soda, if one of them is an athlete, that athlete has to then go back and report to somebody, their compliance officer in the athletics program, that they had a hot dog and a soda, and that amount is deducted then from their food allowance. Now, I'm sure that strikes you as crazy as it does me, but that's where we have come in this peculiar mix of the ideal of the student athlete at these institutions and these huge behemoth big league entertainment enterprises. And make no mistake, this is as big as any kind of entertainment that's out there. It's bigger than Hollywood. It's bigger than Las Vegas. This is big entertainment with billions of dollars at stake. And we are just sort of being pushed along by the forces of this in ways that are really troubling. I don't think, I'm going to plug someone's book here. It's not finished yet, but I don't think that there has been an insightful, reflective president of a university who, when they have stepped down and been able to sort of take off the mantle of responsibility for these institutions, hasn't written a book that says, ladies and gentlemen, there is something really wrong here. Now, I don't know what the Chancellor's book is going to say, but it is going to be about athletics. So watch this space.
Provost, could you, from your previous experience beyond higher education, provide us some insight in terms of the general economy and perhaps how you see the economic situation affecting higher education over the next few years? So from your international business perspective, where do you see the global economy moving over the next few years?
Well, that's a modest question. I'm optimistic in the long run. If you let me talk like economists for a moment, I'm optimistic in the long run. 5 years from now, I think things are going to be back on track. And I also think that institutions like this will actually be stronger than they are right now. Now, getting from here to there is going to be really tough. And the reason that I think that it's going to be okay and that it's going to be stronger is that institutions like this, in the face of this phenomenon of the states stepping away from their responsibility, are going to have to give us greater and greater latitude to shape our own destiny. So the whole paternalistic notion that we go hat in hand to a group of legislators who have 1,000 responsibilities on their plate, and that they are going to, that we could realistically expect them to understand the nuances of these institutions and the incredible complexity of how they're funded. And so therefore we'll come up with wise policies that will move us dramatically forward. I don't think anybody really believes that anymore. But we are not yet there. And so I'm hoping that out of this comes a relationship between the states and these wonderful, incredibly valuable, sacred institutions, where there's a greater degree of trust and recognition that if you've got the obligation to fulfill your mission, you also have to have the responsibility to shape your own destiny in doing so, your own capacity to do so. We've begun to see that. I mean, look at this legislative session. This has been, in some ways, the most successful legislative session we've ever seen at this institution. We have seen control of admissions be relinquished by the legislature to the Board of Regents, where it belongs. We have seen them step away from their insistence on overseeing our building if we don't use state money. We have private money, we can now go ahead and do it ourselves. We estimate that that'll save us 18 to 24 months for every project that's privately funded, and most buildings on this campus have been privately funded for the last 25 years. That's a big savings for us. They passed the Jayhawk Generations tuition waiver bill that will allow us to adjust for specific targets to enhance the revenue stream here. That was a complicated concept, and the legislature, I don't think, except for this session, I don't think they would have even entertained such a notion. But they are recognizing that they can't do what historically they have been asked to do. And so if they can't do it, do you let these institutions wither and die? No one will allow that. They would have a revolution on their hands. So I think over the next 5 years we're going to see this kind of steady shift of responsibility for shaping our destiny back to the institution where it belongs, where it has been in the private sector for a long time and will be more and more in our side. And at the end of about a 5-year period, I think these institutions are going to be really strong and as viable as they've ever been.
We have, we're coming up on 1 o'clock here, but we do have an emailed question, which is on the subject of athletics and whether or not athletics is charged for services that the university provides, or if there's any sort of revenue that comes from athletics, I guess beyond what you had mentioned previously with the scholarships and whatnot.
We do get some revenues from things like the deal with Coca-Cola, with pouring rights, as they're called. Theresa can talk specifically about things. In general, what I can tell you is that we've looked pretty carefully at every place that there is an overt or hidden subsidy for athletics and moved away from it. I'll give you a specific example. Until 2 years ago, I think we were picking up the electric bill routinely for all buildings everywhere, including the buildings that house athletics. Don Steeples and his colleagues did an analysis of the cost of that, et cetera, et cetera. It was roughly equal to the amount of money that the athletics program was using to subsidize tickets. We were facing dramatic increases in utility bills. And so we cut a deal with athletics that said, look, we'll swap you out. We'll pay for the subsidy, you pay for the electrical bill. That was a really good deal because the bills continued to go up dramatically, and athletics is eating it, and is also responsible for any efficiencies that any lights they can shut off. And that's the right structure. When we got clobbered with this incredible cut that we were looking at here, we had to cut the subsidy for those tickets. I didn't like doing that because it's a benefit to the very people who make this place work. But I would rather have done that than make further cuts in employment. If it hadn't been for that kind of deal that Don Steeples and his colleagues cut, however, we couldn't, I don't know what we would have done because we had to pay for the light bill, you see. And so we've extracted every pound of flesh that we possibly can to make sure that we're not subsidizing the athletics program. I'm sure there may be still some subsidies buried somewhere that we haven't identified yet. When we do, we'll go back and visit the athletics programs. Yes, yeah.
They pay $9 million in tuition to the university.
Thank you for that. That's right.
Mention that the officers that direct traffic and take care of crowd control at the football and basketball games, athletics pays the overtime on all of those employee salaries. They are also responsible for maintaining all of their facilities. They don't get any money from the state to help them maintain the facilities.
And I will say, in spite of my agreeing with the peculiarly skewed values that we see playing out here, the athletics department has been very understanding about our insisting that they take on these additional costs.
And real quick, you said it, because I don't know that the internet feed caught it, you said it's $9 million in scholarships?
Tuition.
So you repeat that.
The athletics pays $9 million in tuition to the university for the student athletes.
One more question.
Sure.
Comment, because I was disappointed, and at my age, I forget when it was. It could have been last month, it could have been a year ago.
I know exactly what you're talking about,
But
unfortunately.
there was an article in the paper, and it was at a time when the Athletic Corporation was doing something phenomenal. And maybe one reason I don't remember when is because there have been several of these things come up recently, or over the last several months. This one, there was a comment, I believe, by some in the paper, the article in the paper quoted someone, I believe from the Athletic Corporation, saying that private contributions to the Athletic Corporation do not draw away from the expenses of the university. There's not a conflict there. So it gave the impression that, when you're talking about funding a Sanskrit chair, and they give the money to the athletics instead, to me that's, it did hurt the university if the person gives the money to athletics. There was a choice there. This comment in the paper made it sound like there aren't those choices, that giving money to the Athletic Corporation is not a choice of, do I give money to athletics or do I give money to the academic side? And I was waiting, hoping that someone from the university, a provost, a chancellor, someone in an higher administration, would write to the paper and say, wait a minute, there is a conflict. The money that goes to athletics are dollars that don't come to the university. That's simplifying it, I know, but I have several other examples of where contributors to athletics were not aware, I don't think, of really how the university is funded. And over the years, as I was part of the university, and I actually still am, the public do not really understand, it seems to me, how the university is funded. A few years ago, this was probably more like 10 or 15 years ago, when was Meiskin's dean? We were having financial problems, budget problems. This isn't new. It may be greater, but it isn't new. And in talking with people out in the public, they said, well, just admit more students, and that'll solve your budget problems. And in fact, admitting more students, certainly in-state students, hurts us budgetarily. It costs us more than we get. But those people, the people that we were talking to, felt that all we had to do was get more tuition and our problem would be solved. So I think that if we can do a better job of helping the public and potential donors particularly understand how the university is funded, they may think twice about whether they're giving their money to the 800-pound gorilla or to fund a chair in Sanskrit.
Well, I'm all in favor of your suggestion of a chair in Sanskrit. Even though I'm leaving here, it would be wonderful to leave a chair in Sanskrit. But you're exactly right, and this is a challenge because any attempt to simplify this remarkably complex organization leaves you vulnerable to contradiction. And I think you make a very good point that that too often, out of fear of not getting something absolutely right, we don't step up and speak with the clarity that the public deserves with regard to these issues. I think you make a very good point.
If any of you have additional questions that you want to ask anybody, feel free to do so. If we've probably reached the end of the formal part of this event, but we'll be glad to respond to any questions that you might have. Thank you.